Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Midtown Scholar Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Alex Brubaker. I'm the manager here at the Scholar, and as always, I am live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at the Bookstore. Whether you're joining us on Crowdcast or Facebook Live or even YouTube Live, thanks so much for tuning in. Welcome to our live stream series where we host authors and speakers, and we keep the conversation going about books we love. Our featured book this evening is The Girl from Widow Hills by Megan Miranda. If you haven't yet purchased the book, I'd like to encourage you to do so. Purchasing Megan's book through us helps support the author, this event series, and you get a great book out of it. Megan was kind enough to send us signed book plates. Here they are. We have them in the store. If you click the green button below, it's right below my face, the green button there. Click that. That'll take you to our website, and then we'll send out first edition copies with signed book plates to you. If you're on Facebook Live or YouTube Live, just head over to our website at midtownscholar.com to grab your copy. I'd also like to make one shameless plug here. For the first time, we're trying something new. We're trying to be as creative and innovative as possible here to keep these events free and open to the public. But they are work and there's costs involved, so no pressure. But we've added a button on Crowdcast that allows you to donate to this event series. Some people have asked about it. If you're buying the book, don't feel like you have to donate, but the suggested donation, if you don't buy the book, is just a couple bucks. So thank you for considering donating and helping us keep the content alive. But now on to our program this evening. We are thrilled to welcome best-selling authors Megan Miranda and Wendy Walker to virtual Harrisburg. Wendy Walker is a former commercial litigator and investment banker who now works at home in Connecticut, writing and raising her children. She is the author of psychological thrillers. We're also very excited to be working with Wendy this evening because she has a new novel coming out in a couple months called Don't Look for Me, which has been called, quote, a gripping psychological thriller with unexpected twists. So support Wendy, pre-order it through your local indie, and maybe if we're lucky, we might see Wendy in a couple months for her book as well. Our featured author this evening is Megan Miranda. She is a New York Times bestselling author of All the Missing Girls, The Perfect Stranger, and The Last House Guest, a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. She has also written several books for young adults, including Come Find Me, Fragments of the Lost, and The Safest Lies. She grew up in New Jersey, graduated from MIT, and lives in North Carolina with her husband and 2 children. Once again, our featured book is The Girl from Widow Hills, which is now out this week. It has been called, quote, Hitchcockian, and it's been praised as Miranda's best novel yet. Last thing before I hand it off to Megan and Wendy, please click the Ask a Question button below if you have a question for either Megan or Wendy. We can't promise we'll get to all of them, but we'll save some time after the interview to go over your questions. But at this time, please join me in welcoming onto the screen Megan Miranda and Wendy Walker.
Hello.
Hi, Wendy. How are you?
I am so good. It's so good to see you.
I know. I'm so excited to see you. I was just thinking last year, I think we were together around this time in person doing an event together. So I'm so excited that we're able to do this virtually.
And I was just going to say the same thing because I'm noticing that there's like 102 people who are at this virtual event. And the last event that we did in rainy Providence.
It was so rainy. Yeah.
I think there were like 4 people who showed up.
And it was the worst weather. Yeah. So this is wonderful.
One of them was her husband, and one of them was a friend of mine from high school. So it was like, it's just so, this is such a great platform. So thank you everybody for taking the time out of your evening to join us. This is really saving authors from, what has been really disastrous in launching books and not being able to go out and tell people about our work and to reach our readers and connect with our readers. So really grateful to the Bookstore, really grateful to all of you for tuning in. And now let's just dive into The Girl from Widow Hills. Okay, so I'm gonna just put it right out there. When I read the premise, I thought about baby Jessica in the well. And then I was like, I don't know if I can say that because that really dates me. Right? But was that an inspiration? I'm trying to think of other stories that were like that. That's the only one that came to my mind was, for those of you who are too young to remember, years ago, there was a little girl, maybe 18 months old, who had crawling around the backyard. I think she was that young, right? And she'd fallen into a tiny well, maybe really, really tiny, but very, very deep. So to get to her, they had to go underground and drill. And it took them, I think, a few days to get to get baby Jessica out of the well. And I will never forget the coverage of that. And this book tapped right into that feeling of the connection that we all felt to this person, baby Jessica. Mm-hmm. And I love that you tapped into that same concept and that same feeling for Arden Maynor, and really showed us what it would be like to survive that, be in the media attention, have it turn on you, right, as it always does, and then try to hide and reinvent yourself and sort of always running from it. So was that the inspiration? Like, where did this idea come from? When did it first pop into your head, and how did you develop it?
It did a little bit. It came from a few different places, but I love that you were thinking about that when you were reading it, because I think there is, like, you say that name and you just remember baby Jessica. It doesn't matter how long it's been. And so the thing I was really inspired by were these media stories that capture the public interest. And I remember it was years ago, and I don't know if it was an anniversary was coming up, or it might have been even like baby Jessica was getting married. I was just listening to the news and there was a snippet that said baby Jessica's getting married, or 25-year anniversary. And I was a child when it happened, so I don't remember actively following it. And yet you said that name, and in a second I could remember the entire story. And that stuck with me in the back of my mind. I always start with character before story. So I'm really interested in thinking about character. So that stuck with me, but it didn't trigger like a story idea. And when it really kind of came together was a few years ago during the Thai cave rescue. And I remember how invested I became, and pretty much everyone I knew became, in following this story. And I remember because I was up in New Jersey at my cousin's wedding with my family when they were found, and we were all kind of texting and watching the rescue together. And I remember more than anything that feeling when they were found alive. And like, I got goosebumps like then, and I have it now, just that elation and how invested we had been. And I'd been thinking too about comparing these two stories of the difference in media coverage from something that happened 30 years ago versus something that happened now, and our access to information now. And I just was thinking about, the more I wanted, the more I could find. And that way that the media and the audience kind of play off one another to create the story that really lives on in your consciousness. So that was kind of the two ideas that came together. And then I was thinking, because I start with characters, okay, so what if there's this really good story, this really happy story, but this character does not want any part of it. They've never felt any ownership of the story because they don't remember what happened to them. It's always been this story told about them. And the older they became, they felt people wanted something from them in return, because they want to know, we followed your case. Are you okay? We want to see what you're doing now. And what if they just don't want to be part of that at all? And that's where the character of, she was Arden when she was younger, but as soon as she's old enough at 18, she moves away. She changes her name. She goes by her middle name, changes her last name, and really doesn't want anyone to know who she is, and feels like she's actually succeeded in creating this anonymous second life for herself. But there's always this fear that people will find her again. And something I'm always kind of drawn to is that theme of like, can you become somebody new? Does the past kind of catch up with you? But that it was like, I was, baby Jessica was one of the inspiration, not necessarily what happened to her, but the media coverage of that. And so I was thinking about what makes a story sensational, what makes us remember it. And that's kind of where I got the sleepwalking angle to it. So the backstory was that when Arden was 6 years old, she was swept away during a storm while she was sleepwalking into the system of pipes under the town of Widow Hills. And there was this huge search and rescue that followed, and it was highly publicized, and it did take several days to find her. And when I was talking to my publisher about the idea, and I think I was up in New York talking to a bunch of them, and I'd mentioned this, and every single person had a sleepwalking story. And maybe it wasn't them, but it was, oh, I knew somebody who, or a kid, or a family member, or I heard this story. And it made me think, okay, there's something kind of universal about, what this, almost like a fear of what can happen when you're asleep, when your consciousness is away. And I think that taps into something that, you can almost imagine, not for yourself, maybe for your children. Like it seems like it's these news stories, they seem like they're these big things, but they happen in a way that doesn't seem impossible. It seems very possible to us and to like the people close to us.
Yeah, and I feel like there's this connection that makes a lot of sense, that that she would have sort of this alternate life going on while she's sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And it mirrors the fact that she's had to have this alternate life to escape media attention. And what I found so, obviously the twists and turns and plot were amazing, but what I found so thought-provoking was the fact that, first of all, like you said, the story was not defined by her. She was too young. It was defined by her mother, and who was obviously the face of their story. And then it got defined by the reporters, and really that gets driven by what the media wants to hear. And so the questions that are shaped, and the book that was written, I'm sure, you can see it happening, how the public wants the story to read a certain way and be a certain way. And the desire to please the public is so insidious and so subconscious, even, that then as she grows up, she has to become that story. Right. And then she disappears to become someone else. And the sleepwalking, returns. And it's almost like, I don't know, like she's trying to go back to who I don't know. There was something to me that mirrored it, like, or was symbolic about it too, that I found really, really interesting. And of course, the struggle, I kept thinking, like, how sad for her that she has these two close friends at the hospital where she works, and she can't tell them who she really is and how limiting that is. So that made me wonder if because your settings are always really important in your books. They always are almost like another character in your books. So the Last Guest House, I mean, that setting up in Maine, that was really just made it so atmospheric and became like a character in itself. And here she's in this remote location, and it's almost like she's hiding. Or how did you decide to put her there? Is that the place that she goes where she can just hide and be Arden still, but the Arden she really wants to be? What was the motivation for that, and how did you decide to put that in the story?
I love that question, and I also love settings. Like, that is something really important to me. I feel like it kind of does mirror their journey. And so, first of all, I'm very drawn to settings in woods and near mountains. I just think there's something so atmospheric about all of those, and I think there's such beauty in it. But when things turn scary, they can also be very ominous. And in this case, Olivia does pick this house that is very far away from kind of, the rest of the people. It's sort of it's an old town, it's a small town, but there's a new hospital in it. And so there's a lot of, new apartment buildings, kind of a new town center where a lot of the people that she works with live in, and she wants no part of that. She lives much more remote area. And I think for her, she's very drawn to being alone. And I think it feels like safety to her. Because like you said, she's had these limitations her entire life because she's never opened up about herself. She has a really hard time making these long-term connections or friendships that really last, because once you reach a certain point, she's not really giving her full self. And so she can't expect that from people in return. So for her, this house in the middle of the woods is safety, and it's beautiful. And I think it's, she's independent and she feels like this is the life she wants. But there's this part of her also, I feel like throughout the entire book, is really yearning for that connection with people and not really sure how to get there. And then obviously, so the book begins as the 20-year anniversary is approaching, and she starts to feel that people are watching her and maybe she's been found. And so now this house that had once been safety suddenly filtered through this perspective of fear and worry turns really ominous and scary. And so I'm really interested in that with settings, how what can be beautiful can also be terrifying. And I think how we view things is very much kind of our perspective and our emotion and our own experiences. And she hates enclosed spaces. She spent 3 days trapped in a very enclosed space. So for her, the wider and vaster it is, the safer.
And yet still, it then becomes a lonely place because it's so isolated and she can't really, be around other people. And so, yeah, I love that. I love the nuances of it and how it did change. And it suddenly did become a place where she was afraid to be, and afraid to be alone, because the sleepwalking, being alone and sleepwalking is like the worst combination, right? Because you're there looking out for you. And so,
she puts like a lock on her door, just try to wake herself up. She doesn't know how to protect herself really from herself. Yeah.
I mean, no, it's terrifying. I was never a big sleepwalker, but I remember very clearly waking up one morning and I was underneath my bed.
Really?
I was like 5 or 6 years old. I don't have a lot of memories from that time, but I woke up and banged my head on. I was like, where am I? And I had woken up and gone underneath my bed, and I don't remember it at all. Anyway, I think a lot of people have either they talk in their sleep or so sleep is it's, and I love that she then stops sleeping and then seek help for it. And that draws her out too, because now she's even more exposed by having to have questions asked about why she's not sleeping. So it worked so well in the story. So, okay. So now we have these pieces, right? So we've got, you have your idea and you have your character and then the concept starts to get developed. You get the setting. And then how do you construct the rest of the story? Do you plot? Are you a pantser? Do you, fly by the seat of your pants? Are you a little both? Because I feel as though some of your books required a lot of plotting to pull off. And then others maybe the more atmospheric. I could see where you could make changes and go back because the plot had more fluidity and more just more flexibility. Has it changed book to book? Are you always one way or the other? What's your process once you get these first pieces?
My process is always to fly by the seat of my pants. And so as you were saying, like I think that's why I have to do a lot of work in revision. So what I think a lot of people might do that work up front of plotting things out. I cannot see an entire idea up front. I can kind of see turning points where I think, okay, I have an idea of where maybe not like the big aha reveal, but where your perspective is going to shift, maybe the halfway turning point. And I have an idea of where I want the character arc to go. So I feel like that really guides the story in a way. And I think about, what the character is afraid of, not necessarily an external fear, but, in Olivia's case, it's being discovered for who she is, in addition to this investigation in the present that is closing in on her. Right. And so the plot kind of develops almost in opposition to that, the character has to go through these things that I'm putting in her way in order to, get to the other side. So it kind of develops that way, but really the beginning 50 to 100 pages of the book is me just diving in and figuring out who my characters are, what their relationships are like, who is this cast. I like to channel that uncertainty that I don't know into my main character. I think it helps me to write her fear and distrust authentically, because I also don't know who did it at the start. And then I do a lot of, once I kind of figure things out as I go, sometimes I figure it out. This case, I figured it out pretty early.
Yeah.
Some books, it takes me a little longer in the process, but then I go back and obviously do a lot of rewriting, and I kind of plot as I go. I have like Excel spreadsheets where I make notes as I go. And then as I see things, I put them into place, but it's not up front. Are you a plotter?
I'm a total plotter, and I will get completely stuck if I don't know what to write in that chapter. But I will say, like, I can do like the first 50 pages, which is the setup, right? So I'll have like a concept, do the first 50 pages or so, and then I have to sort of outline the rest pretty meticulously. Otherwise, I get mentally stuck. But I love how every writer is different.
Yeah. And we all get to the same place in the end. Yeah.
And I definitely will get to a point where I will come up with a new plot twist, usually at 4 a.m. And then I can't get back to sleep unless I like dictate it in my phone. And and then I'll go back and I'll integrate that into the book, and I'll have to do a revision. But I have to sort of have it laid out. But what about the ending? So maybe you don't know all the twists and turns that are going to happen, or all the red herrings, because obviously, and when you write thrillers and then you read thrillers, every character that comes up, I'm like, is this a suspect or a red herring? Right. Making a note. And I'm sure readers do that too. Like, okay, she told us the bartender's name. I wonder if he's important. And then, and as a writer, I think we have to be cognizant of that. Like, if I give a character a name, my reader is going to wonder if this is an important character. But that said, do you know the ending? Do you know who is the culprit, and why, and the motivation for that, and then sort of pants your way to the end? Or does the end sometimes surprise you?
The end. So I will say, in this case, pretty early on, I knew the end, which is not always the case. But it felt, when I was writing, and I had maybe 3 things I was toying with, and then I'd say, by a quarter of the book, I was fairly certain what the end was going to be, and so I was working my way toward that point at all times. That's not always the case. So for All the Missing Girls, which was my first book for adults, there was, a disappearance that happened 10 years earlier, and there's a disappearance in the present. And I did know what happened 10 years earlier from the start. I did not know what happened in the present. And so it took me pretty far into that first draft to figure it out. So I think, having some sort of skeleton of what you do know then helps, but it's not necessarily the big that I do know. But this case, it was, which was unusual. I was excited when I was like, I know what I'm doing. Okay.
So, the ending is so great, and it does just, it weaves its way in, and the way it comes about is really great. And I wish I could say more, but I don't want to spoil it. But I wanted to also ask about the structure in this book, because you sprinkle in chapters that are pieces of reports and interviews from 20 years ago when the event took place. And it's really interesting because I really loved that, because even though it takes you out of the story that's unfolding, it gives you a break from her narration, which is the primary narration. And it also then, makes you sort of switch your brain back 20 years and try to start getting some more pieces to the puzzle, so that the narration becomes, I don't know, it was really fun. How did you come up with that idea? And did you, when you were sprinkling those in, was that also sort of, I'll throw this in now? Or did you have did you know which pieces had to go in at some point?
So first of all, I love that question, and I love structure. I think I'm fascinated not only in books, but in television shows and movies with the way a story is told and what that reveals about a story. I think you could do it different ways and you reveal something different, even if it's the same story. So in this case, when I started, I got about 50 pages in, and I kept talking about this big thing that had happened when she was a child. And I felt like I was bogging the story down because there was a lot of information. Like, do I make it just a paragraph or two and ask you to trust me that it was a really big deal?
Right.
Or do I give too much information and slow the story down? And so about 50 pages in, I said, what, I'm going to show it. And I stripped everything away and kind of was like, okay, at the beginning, I'll show the press conference, their transcripts, the transcript of the press conference where she's missing. And then it's the transcript of the interviews of the people looking for her. And then it's the weather report. And so you can understand why this had happened, and kind of grew and grew into this bigger case. But then, so they kind of developed side by side at that point. But then they started to take on an arc of their own and kind of became something different. And I saw them instead as something that was almost chasing her. And also it did help me, so this is not a spoiler, but in the present, she's sleepwalking and she wakes up standing over a dead body in her front yard. And that's what kicks off this mystery in the present. And so at the end of that chapter, I was like, okay, here's where I'm going to put the interview with the doctor from the sleep clinic. And so then you can kind of see the different types of sleep disorders that he talks about and what to be concerned with. And so it felt like I was able to use them to kind of give information without taking too much time, and that hopefully it was propelling forward. And then as the book goes on, some of those transcripts also are in the present. There are, emails that are coming to her, there's letters. And so I felt like always there were these things that were chasing her, that she was trying to outrun. And that's kind of the shape that took.
And I just loved it because it was like you got to go back in time and live it, right? So if you were, when these things do happen in real life, and we are so hungry for the news reports, and we want to hear from the doctor, and we want to hear about the weather, we want to hear from all the neighbors, and we want to hear from the mother, and we want to hear from all these people, and we're used to receiving the information about the event in that way from different people, right? So when we're following a story like that, it's not like it just, it's not a put together documentary with one narrator telling us a story. Maybe years later it'll take that form, but in the moment when you're living it, it's like, oh my God, we have this neighbor who has something to say. It's like, oh, what is she saying? So it added to that. I don't know. It was so great how it brought you back, into that moment and that visceral feeling of, will they save her? And you're like,
right.
Do save her because she's narrating the rest of the book. But you're, at the time when you get to have a little bit of that feeling, and I think it really works so well. It was really, yeah, no, it was so great. And then I also wanted to ask you, when you're developing these stories, this is and developing the characters, do you have first of all, do you name them right away, and how do you name them? Do you get attached to them? Do you have a physical, how do you come up with their physical description, and how, how they appear to you? And then do you end up having favorites? So how real are your characters to you beyond being just sort of pawns on your chessboard and building your plot?
They're so real to me. They're people that I would talk about to my family, when I'm, plotting things. And then this person did this. So, and I think, and I don't know if this is because, I work on one draft at a time, and I spend, when I start drafting, it's I'm in it, I'm working on it every day. And, by the time you write a book and then revise it and they're editing it and before it gets published, you spent 2 years with these people, at least.
You
Some
do.
books are longer.
Yeah.
And they're in your head. And so for names, it depends. So I have a very large extended family, and I was a high school teacher. And so I try not to use any names of people I know. And then I always fail. And the book's published and someone's like, there I am. No, it's not you, I promise. But so I think I gravitate towards, Arden. I didn't know anyone who was an Arden. And I really liked that name. And I also thought to myself, I thought at first that was going to be her name, in the second half of the book. It was a name I felt very connected to for her. But I realized I got about 50 pages in that name is very distinct, in a way that if somebody said Arden Maynor, they're going to okay, that's the girl from Widow Hills.
Right.
And so I realized that was going to be the name in the past. And, she doesn't want a name that's unusual now in the present. So she wants something, she goes by her middle name, which is Olivia, and changes her last name. And so all of the characters, a lot of times their names just kind of come to me when I start. The one thing I don't do a lot of is description of them when I'm writing a draft. And I think it's because I see them in my head, but I don't necessarily put it on the page. And so when I'll send it to my critique partner, maybe the first half early on, they're like, I have no idea what any of these characters look like. So that's something that I usually, but in my head, I see them. And so then I go back and kind of put that. I don't feel like I don't have a good answer of how I come up with that, though. They kind of do exist real people to me. Are you the same? Do you feel?
Absolutely. And then somebody will say, but they exist to me in their heads. And so rarely do they have really distinct characteristics. So if, when people say who would play this person in the movie version, or who did you picture? And actually, I was speaking with some other authors about their characters, the Constantine sisters, and I was fascinated by this, but they said that they actually, Lynn will find pictures of women in magazines and like movie stars, and then she's like, oh, this is Amber, or this is so and so, and then actually sort of base the description of someone on a real image of a person that, and not necessarily someone famous, but even just somebody, from an advertisement. And I don't do that either. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So same thing with titles there's a question from Stacey about titles. So all these things, right? The book becomes very personal, right? Very personal with the characters, with the names of the characters, and then of course there's the title of the book. So I know people are always interested in how much say you have in the title. Right. This title, I feel like it sort of named itself, but did it? Okay, was it? And you just submit a first draft, like, here's the title, here's the book.
The one and only time, like the only time that I am notorious for like either not having, sometimes I just turn in a book and I'm like, it's book 2. Like it's book 8, because I know it's a process, because you want to have the right title that really, captures the essence of your story and also conveys something to the audience and says that it's a suspense novel. And like All the Missing Girls, when I turned that book in, when I sent that in, I called it Disappear, because it was, to me, the theme of, characters disappearing in different ways. The character walks into the woods, they don't come back out. There are versions of ourselves who disappear over time, and that kind of went with the main character. And obviously that's not very distinct. And so it was a lot of we did a lot of brainstorming, and kind of the whole publishing team would help out, where we would brainstorm, we would look at lines in the story. We would, just pick bits and pieces. And so All the Missing Girls came about in that way of brainstorming. The Perfect Stranger was not the original title. The Last House Guest was not the original title. But what I realized is that all of my adult books, the title seems to kind of capture the main character. And so, The Perfect Stranger, or one of the main characters. The Last House Guest, Avery, was the last house guest of the Lohman family. And so The Girl from Widow Hills, it seemed right immediately, because this is what she was known as in the media. She's the girl from Widow Hills, and it is the thing that it's the identity she is also trying to escape. And so, when she finds herself the center of this murder investigation, and if they realize she is the girl from Widow Hills, they'll know she's a sleepwalker, and it all is going to unravel.
Yeah, no, and it's a great title. So I'm going to start taking other questions. And I wanted to touch on something. You mentioned that you had somebody who reads your first draft. So there's a question from Patty about, do you have beta readers? Do you use any professional editors before you submit a draft? And how do you go about, once you have that first, pass, in making it, and then deciding whether it needs more revision before you submit it?
Yeah, so I do. I have 3 critique partners that I have been lucky enough to know since we all kind of started our writing careers at the same time. And so, this is my 11th book. And so we kind of know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and the things that, in a first draft, we kind of know, like, I'm a character person, but I might not have plot points down. And so sometimes I'll get notes like, do you know where this is going? Do you know what's happening? And it's really helpful for me to have an external reader, just in general, so that you can because I think I'm being clear in something and a reader isn't picking up on it. So I do try to get feedback before I turn it in. And sometimes I do a lot of work, and sometimes it's closer, and it really depends on the book. And I think that's even the case when I do turn it in to my editor. Sometimes the draft is close in the first draft. Sometimes it takes 6 complete versions to really find the right heart of the story you're trying to tell and the right structure for it. And that's really, I feel like that's kind of what they're there to help with and discuss and think about, kind of what's the right way you can try, or what's something that's not working here to think about. So, the book that took me the longest to write and required the most versions and revisions was The Last House Guest. The book that was probably closest when I turned it in was The Girl from Widow Hills. So, and they were right back to back, and I can never know which it's going to be when I start.
Yeah, it's incredible, right? Because you can write yourself into a corner. You can, I so many times I'll have a great idea and then I'll start to plot it out in my head and realize I can't go anywhere with this. Like at least not in this genre. It's not going to, or the structure won't work. And that's amazing to have people that can help you with that. And so Pam wanted to know what's next. What do we have to look forward to?
I am in the middle of my next draft. I don't want to say too much about it yet because, you probably realize from this conversation, a lot can change from the beginning to the end. And I'm close to the end, but I haven't, been through the revision process yet. It's, the same type of genre, the same types of themes that I'm really drawn to. It does center on a very tense dynamic between two women characters, and it's set kind of in a neighborhood, like a self-contained neighborhood where a crime happens. That's like the cast of characters. So I'm excited, but it's a little too early to kind of give a full description.
And Pam was also asking how the pandemic has impacted your writing, and I'm curious how it's impacted not just your schedule. Obviously, you have children who've been homeschooled, and now presumably they're doing mommy camp, daddy camp. But how has it affected you, just in terms of practically being able to write, but also, do you feel like now that it's several months in, as you're writing, is it infiltrating any of the sort of emotional experiences of the characters, any of the plot points, and is it finding its way in either consciously or subconsciously into your work in progress?
I think it is. I've noticed that recently. So like you were saying, I think the first few months are very much kind of an adjustment in schedule, and realizing, okay, this routine that I've been doing isn't really working with everybody home, and just making, the adjustments. I already work from home though. So I think it wasn't as hard a transition as it was for my kids coming home or for other careers. But I do write, I find I write in smaller chunks throughout the day, where before I wrote in like a solid chunk during school hours. So it changed a little bit, but I have, when I was writing, the things that would really pop into my head were like, wait, they shouldn't be at each other's house. They shouldn't be congregating. And so it was really kind of weird or difficult to be writing that, when like my instinct was that this shouldn't be happening right now. And now I think it's more working its way into themes, as opposed to like, I've gotten past that and I'm working out the plot, but I do, I think there's a lot more introspection when we're home alone and thinking about things. And I find that kind of working its way into the main character, where she's really assessing what she's doing right now, or what she has been doing.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is such a subtle psychological phenomenon that everyone is sharing. Everybody has a heightened level of anxiety. We're cooped up. I was even reading an article about how it's affecting our memory, that the lack of external stimulation from just being out and about is preventing our memories and our brains from distinguishing day to day. So so small things like what you had for dinner last week, or if you talked to somebody last week, the days are all running into one another because you're not doing different things on different days. You're not going to the grocery store, on Monday, and then the gym on Tuesday, and then out to dinner on Thursday or whatever. It's just pretty much home. So all these things I think are really interesting. And I think it's going to be great though to have a book like that because it will resonate. We will still be feeling, I think, the impact of this when your next amazing novel releases into the world. So do you have any books that are your favorite? Candace wanted to know. Do you have any
Ones that I read?
you wrote? No, that you wrote.
That I wrote. Oh, that I wrote. Oh, it's so hard.
We talked about this off screen earlier, how it's like having to choose your favorite child, which is really hard to do. But your books can't blame you and go into therapy later. So you can tell this one.
So it's always usually the one I've just finished. And I think it's because you've spent so long with these characters and they're fresh in your mind and you're thinking about them and you're talking about them. And so right now it is The Girl from Widow Hills. But there are books that linger as well, where, years later, I think, I wonder what those characters are doing. I hope they're okay. And they stick with you. And I find those are the books that took me the longest to write. And also that I had for me, that was All the Missing Girls. It was my second book idea, but it was my sixth published novel. It was the idea that I kept coming back to, that I would get 50 pages in and it wasn't working. If you haven't read it, it's a story that's told primarily in reverse. And I had this idea early on and it just kept building layer upon layer. And it took me several years to feel like I had the story and then write it. And it was sort of a book that required a lot of trial and error. And so when I reached the end of that book by myself in my office was like one of the highlights of my writing career, even though it was like all by myself and it was just kind of finishing a draft. And so because of that, I feel very attached to that book still.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard. I feel different attachments to different books for different reasons. So it's hard to say which is a favorite. And I have books that get scrapped, and actually one of those is probably my favorite.
Oh,
isn't that right now? So I'm like, my baby won't be out in the world. But it is interesting how it develops because because the stories come from different places inside of us, and then and then the process of writing them and what was going on in our lives at the time we were writing them, I think is interesting. So Melissa wanted to know, are you inspired by other genres or other authors, and how much? I know for myself, when we both blurb a lot of books within our genre, and I know I'll get, I will sometimes read someone else's work who I'm not familiar with and don't know their writing style, and I'll be like, oh, that's so good. I wish I could write more like that. And then, it's not that you copy it, but it's almost like having taken another class in writing. I think it was so effective how that was done, or how just even the tense that was used, or switching to a third person narration versus first person. So how much are you inspired or informed by either other genres or other books as you read?
I am. I mean, I think, I'm a huge reader as well. And I, grew up reading mysteries and suspense. So I'm definitely inspired by other authors. And, I think a lot about different ones, like what you can do with character, what you can do with structure. I mean, I remember reading Gone Girl and being like, how did she, wanting to go back and read it again and be like, how did she do that? And, I love character-driven suspense. So, Tana French is somebody that I love reading as well. I feel like she writes these character-driven suspense, and every crime is like perfectly suited for the person who's investigating it. But really, I mean, I also was a kid who loved science. And so I loved Michael Crichton. I loved science fiction. I love thinking about how science fiction can mix with thrillers. And I feel like there's a lot of crossover in genres. And so I do, you read a romance novel, and obviously suspense also incorporates romantic relationships and different. So I feel like there are everything is combined sometimes in different books.
And so when you sit down either to start plotting a novel or thinking about a novel, or even day to day to sort of switch gears from being a mom or whatever, taking care of your house and all the things that you're doing, to sitting down to write and dive into your stories. And our stories are dark too. So we had one question was how such sweet women like us write these books. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll take that compliment, right? But,
I love that.
But now, how do you what do you do to mentally prepare? Do you read like
Yeah.
the last chapter that you've written? Do you watch, is there anything you watch or read to get inspired? Or like, how do you switch gears to writing
Yeah.
dark stories?
Well, I do also think routine really helps me, so that, I write in the same place every day. And usually I used to write the same times every day. And so I got in the habit of, the office is where I do like the writing of the thrillers and I do the research that's scary sometimes. And then when I close the office door, I kind of leave that behind and go to the rest of my life. But I grew up, like, I love the puzzle aspect of suspense. And I was a kid who was afraid of everything, but I was always drawn to these darker stories. And I think it was because as the character, you take your journey through and you make it to the other side. And so because I'm writing like from these, I think a lot about the character and I think about the journey they're taking through to the other side. And so, that's kind of how I see it. And, there are obviously, I do read the chapter beforehand when I come and kind of get in that headspace. And I'll sometimes listen to music that sets the tone of what I'm writing. But I try to leave that behind when I close my office door.
Yeah.
Do you do the same? Do you kind of segment?
I do. And I have to be in, I have to now switch places because I have older kids who have come home from college and trying to give everybody a couple of rooms, like space. So I have I have two places I can go that I now have set up. So I grab my laptop and like, I'm going up there, coffee and all my things. But yeah, the same thing. I need quiet and actually ideally an empty house, because I've gotten so used to writing in an empty house with my kids all in school and even away from college. So it's even now I find early mornings when they're asleep, but when people are moving about the house, there's just this pull, like people need me, people need me, people need me. And it's very hard to, like you said, I have to really go not only into the characters and the dark place and into their heads, because we do write, when we're writing these thrillers, a lot of it's written in close third person, first person, and you are in the head of that character. So you can't just really, write something that's sort of detached and descriptive. It is, you are in the head. You have to come up with internal thoughts and what they're feeling, what they do with those feelings. And, it takes a lot of immersion, I think, into the book. So yeah, I have to do that as well. And you clearly do that because you are in her head and you're, in the moment. And that's, this book is, you're so connected to Liv, Arden, that it just really draws you in and propels the story and makes you want to find out what happened. So everybody, you're going to love this book. You're going to love the character, and you can buy it right now. The link on the website, and I highly recommend that everybody. It will just read this book, because it's not just a great thriller, but it's also so human, and it brings us back to these experiences that we have had in real life following these people, and I think it sheds a whole new light on their experience and what can happen to them, and the twist at the end is phenomenal, and it's got all the things.
Thank you, Wendy.
Girl from Widow Hills. We are getting close to wrapping up. I think I've asked. The only question we haven't touched on is about the cover. Wanted to know. So here's the cover, and how do you? I mean, I know how it works, but explain to people how it works when you're presented with your book cover.
Yeah. So, first of all, I love the book covers. Like I could not come up with them on my own. I'm not somebody who kind of has like a visual mind. And so I don't kind of give a lot of, there's a time when they're like, are you having any thoughts? But I feel like the cover designers have just done an amazing job, the design department, of kind of capturing the feel and the tension and just the heart of each of these stories. And so for The Girl from Widow Hills, we had the title beforehand, and I did see a few different versions of possibilities, and I was sent them and got to kind of, give my feedback. And I think we all, as soon as we all saw this cover for the girl from Widow Hills, that this final one, we all were like, that is it. That's the right, it's not literal, but it really captures, the feel and the motion. And I feel like it does, like they match my other covers as well. And so I'm thrilled. I'm not a big part of the process other than opening the email and telling people I love it.
Well, it's just so great because when I saw it and then I read what it was about, and I was like, okay, clearly you can see like the girl in danger from, the air, but also it's symbolic that she's running.
Yeah.
She's running. This is not only the girl who's being swept away underwater, but it's also the girl who's been running for 20 years and, her hair trailing behind her. So I was like, that's so clever. So I love the cover.
Thank you.
So I think that's all the questions. I think we got pretty much everything in the discussion. Also in all the questions. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I just want to say a huge thank you to Wendy. And I adore all of Wendy's books. If you have not read them, I love them. All is Not Forgotten, Emma in the Night before. And I am currently reading her new one, Don't Look for Me, which comes out in the fall. And it is excellent. So thank you so much, Wendy.
This was fun. It's always great to see you.
Just wanted to jump in here to wrap us up. Also, I have to say, booksellers can be very opinionated about book covers. And when we all saw this, we knew this was a great cover. So we all agree. It's a phenomenal cover. So just wrapping us up here, I just want to thank Megan and Wendy for joining us this evening, which is what an incredible conversation. Congratulations, Megan, on this book. It's really, again, beautiful cover. Can't wait to read it. If you guys if our viewers out there want to purchase the book, click the green button below if you're on Crowdcast. It says purchase a signed copy of The Girl from Widow Hills. We have signed book plates we're sending with each and every book. If you're on YouTube Live or Facebook Live, just head to our website, midtownscholar.com, to purchase your copy of the book. And also, if you missed it earlier, we added a donate button to Crowdcast. So if you look down below, there's a donate button. We're just suggesting maybe a couple bucks. If you don't buy the book, no pressure, no worries either way. And again, one more thank you to our viewers out there. We've had over 100 viewers for this event. So thank you all for joining us. And I just want to give the last word to Wendy and Megan. So we'll go to Wendy and then Megan to close this out.
Oh, well, I'm absolutely thrilled that I was asked to do this. I adore Megan. We've been met several panels and events together and at festivals together. And she's like not only sweet and intelligent and a good writer, but she's like super fun to hang out with. So, really one of my favorite people. So I'm absolutely honored and thrilled that I was able to talk to her about this book and bring this book to everyone who's watching. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. And I am just I feel exactly the same about Wendy. I'm so thrilled to be doing this. This is so fun, and so grateful to you as well, Alex, and Midtown, for bringing us together virtually. It's really been an amazing event, and being able to still chat with everyone virtually, even though we are home, has just been incredible. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks again. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.